Back to watching Crossroads. After years of rescuing others, the Syrian white helmets need help being rescued themselves. As the Assad regime closes in on southwest Syria, there are fears the first responder group could be targeted.
According to a U.S. official, a plan is now being finalized to evacuate the group to safety. I-24 News correspondent Marcus White has the latest.
When airstrikes bombard rebel-held areas of Syria, these Syrian civil defense volunteers, known as the White Helmets, came to the rescue. As forces loyal to the Assad government gain more ground in the country, the White Helmets now fear for their lives. They worry the government will start to target them. One volunteer in Quneitra said, "This is the worst day of my life. I hope they rescue us before it's too late." About 1,000 White Helmets are expected to be evacuated from Quneitra near the Israeli border. According to officials who spoke about the plan anonymously, the U.S., Canada, and Britain are leading the evacuation. The volunteers would be taken to transit camps in neighboring countries and then to Britain, Germany, the Netherlands, and possibly Canada. The Oscar-winning 2016 Netflix documentary, The White Helmets, highlighted their work, making the rescue workers a symbol of the Syrian resistance. Since the Syrian civil war began in 2011, the workers have been working tirelessly to dig for survivors after airstrikes and bombings. The group of about 3,000 workers said in April it helped save nearly 100,000 lives. But while the White Helmets wait for their evacuation from Syria, thousands of Syrian villagers are also desperate for safe passage. Many left their homes Friday near the Golan Heights as the UN made a desperate plea.
We urge all parties in Syria to protect and provide safe passage to civilians displaced by the recent fighting in the south of the country. An estimated 140,000 people remain displaced across the southwest and need safe passage out of the area, plus immediate humanitarian assistance, protection and shelter.
Russia's defense ministry says it has sent a proposal to the UN to jointly organize the return of Syrian refugees back to their homeland, an idea the UN wants to hear more about.
UNHCR has not yet seen the details of this plan, but we are ready to engage in discussions about these plans.
For now, the world waits to see what happens to Syrians hoping to return home and the White Helmets who risk their lives hoping to get out. Marcus White, I-24 News.
Joining us to discuss the White Helmets evacuation plan and the situation in Syria is Jonathan Wachtel. He's the former spokesperson for the United States mission to the UN. Jonathan, what do you make of this plan to evacuate the White Helmets and their families? Because there's one thing that I don't really understand. Why announcing the plan? Why confirming it to news outlets? If you and I know that they're going to evacuate through Quneitra, I guess Assad also knows that that's the plan.
Right.
There might be the argument. I mean, honestly, you know, people take calculated risks that way in whether you're going to expose what the plan might be. But there is, of course, the concern that you need to get international attention to this issue. So that might be a way to avoid them coming under direct assault and get them killed off.
So with this evacuation, if and when it happens, is that the end of the U.S. commitment in Syria? Could we be looking at the very end of the Syrian civil war?
It appears to be winding down. I mean, there's still Idlib,
right,
which is presumably going to be the next battle scene, and it will be quite ugly given the number of people there and the concentration and sort of the last hurrah. It'll be like the Alamo
Turkish
of sorts.
Military that is there.
That is true as well, so it's very complicated. But yeah, Derek, I think we're seeing a winding down of this conflict in a very rapid and ugly and sad way.
Yeah.
So if the White Helmets' work on the ground is so important, once they're out, what will happen? I mean, the fighting will continue, but without the White Helmets.
Yeah, without the White Helmets.
How significant is that?
The casualties will probably increase. You know, the White Helmets have been instrumental in not only providing swift carrying and ferrying people out of harm's way, but actually paramedics on the ground saving people's lives. So, you know, we're probably going to see an uptick in casualties as a result of this. This is a major catastrophe overall, and to see such an end to what has been such a noble movement. Now, again, if you're sitting in Moscow and Tehran and in Bashar Assad's office, they're not going to say this is a noble group of people. They see them as terrorists, see them as connected to al-Nusra Front, see them as the enemy, and see them as a bunch of liars telling tales about chemical weapons attacks and everything like that. So, you know, there's two sides to this thing, but the truth is we've all seen the pictures of them ferrying poor children, bleeding from shrapnel and things like that. It's sad.
Right. So then that's the other side of it. If they're not able to be evacuated, if they're not evacuated, the White Helmets say they have a real fear that they'll be assassinated by the Assad regime. Is that real?
Oh, absolutely, it's real.
Yeah.
This is a wrapping up mission. Wrapping up conflict gets ugly often, and killing off White Helmets. I mean, they are considered the enemy by the regime and by Russia and Iran, as I said. So there would be no compunction in taking them out if it came to that. That's why, Tal, going back to your initial question, why announce this? I think it also tells you that they don't have a way to get them out quickly. The situation, it's a war zone.
By the way, I've seen reports that the planning to evacuate the White Helmets recently accelerated during the Brussels summit, the NATO summit in Brussels. Is that one more thing that shows us why NATO is important?
Yeah, that's a very good point, that you need to coordinate things like that. Our Western allies who have been supportive of U.S. efforts in Syria over the last 7 years want to see an end to this that is humane, and some of those allies actually have committed forces and assets to try to deal with the conflict itself. So, yes, there needs to be the coordination, even on the level of something like the White Helmets. You're absolutely right.
As the days go by, we see more and more rebels surrendering to the Assad regime. Is that due to Russian pressure?
It's due to they're in their last stand.
Yeah.
Where do they go from here? Israel and Jordan are not going to open up their borders to allow them to come fleeing into there and try to find some sort of safe haven in that place. Their backs to the wall. They really don't have much of a choice, do they? Some are going to go up to Idlib, but as we talked about earlier, that's the next front line.
But it is, I'm sorry, it is the Russians who are going inside these enclaves, the rebel enclaves, the villages, do the negotiations, and then the Assad regime forces, they go after the Russians already negotiated with the rebels to evacuate. So can we say that Syria is, in fact, maybe under a Russian occupation?
It's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, arguably, yes, and Iranian occupation. And you can also say at the same time that Assad is a mere puppet. And, his longevity really depends on what Moscow and Iran decide to do with him, because let's face it, Bashar Assad has many, many enemies in this world.
Sources are saying the White Helmets could get help with their evacuation, not only from the U.S., but from Canada, from Britain as well. But it wouldn't be a military operation, at least on the U.S. side of things. How would it work, do you think, having all those entities kind of helping these White Helmets get out?
Well, you're gonna create secure areas where you have some firepower to protect them, and you're going to have to ferry them out with whatever assets you have on the ground in terms of helicopters and vehicles to be able to ferry them out as quickly as possible. These things can close. I mean, when you were asking your question about, why is this so difficult, I was thinking about when the Israelis pulled out of South Lebanon. There were casualties and equipment stolen.
In this evacuation story as well.
Absolutely, I would think. On a minimum in terms of intelligence support and humanitarian support. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Jonathan Wachtel, thank you so much for being in, as always.
Well, still to come, tragedy. After a duck boat sinks in Missouri, we'll get the very latest on the tragic accident.
And U.S. diplomats talked about cracking down on North Korea's nuclear use weeks after the president signed a denuclearization agreement with that country's leader. We'll have the latest.